In our previous video, we talked about how to put the CR30 into a Control-Logix or Compact-Logix I/O configuration so that we could read the status of it. While we can't add it to the I/O configuration of a Micro850, we can use explicit messaging to pull our data across. Let's start with a new Micro850 program in Connected Components Workbench, and let's right-click Programs, Add Ladder Diagram. And go ahead and open it up. And let's drag down an instruction block. Let's double click on it and type MSG. And you're going to see several messages, but we're going to look for that SIP explicit message. Double click on it. And first, you notice how some of these are truncated through here. If you will just click into the area to the right of your ladder rung, and then right click and go properties, that's this cell width right here. Let's make the cell width 35. Now we can read what all those say. Well, almost. Let's make that 40. Then we'll be able to read what they all say. Okay. So all we're going to do is we're going to go down through here and create tags for each one of these. So we have the control config. I'm just going to double click on them and put MSG control config. And the next one's the app config. So I'm going to put MSG app config. And just keep going down through all of them. And that'll get us to here. Now we still need to do a little bit of work, so don't get excited and start downloading yet. But now we're ready to start looking at the manual and see if we can work out what some of this means. So here is the Guardmaster Configurable Safety Relay Manual, and it does not have an example for Connected Components Workbench, but it does have an example for RSLogix 500. And the data is going to be the same, and mainly we're going to be looking at the read instance of this. This is the write instance, but all we're concerned about is learning a little bit about the status of this. And so that is going to be the read assembly. So it's saying that we're going to want a service code. Notice it's in hex of E. And then we got some classes, instances, attributes, and notice we got some varying numbers. So we need to understand a little bit about how this works. So let's walk through that. So we're going to take them one at a time. So first we have our control config. Double click on the bottom section of that control config, and that's going to pop this up for you. And mainly in this, we're going to be concerned about the trigger type. Now, if we scroll over to the right, there are some descriptions here. And mainly our trigger type, 0 is trigger once, and 0 is trigger once. And if there's a number there, it's how often to fire it. And that is in milliseconds. So I'm going to use the project value, and I'm just going to put it at 1,000. That'll be 1,000 milliseconds or 1 second. And I made a mistake there, and I do that all the time. Let me go through exactly what I did so that you don't do it. Is I'm going to hit the undo button. But I told you to double click on this bottom part so we could walk through them. And that allows you to come in here and change these values. But if I select the trigger type, then notice if I was to double click on it or click OK, watch what happens to the control config. That changes that. And I shouldn't have done that. So what you actually should do, even though it seems counterintuitive, is once you enter the number there, you can just hit cancel on that. So we'll do it this time with the app config and make sure I focus on that. So we're going to double click on the app config, and we'll hit the arrow by it. And so we have a service, class, instance, and attribute. And be really careful. Notice I'm not going to put anything in the member count because that's something people get confused over. So we have the service code. And if we go back to our manual, it said a service code in hex of E. So first of all, let's just try entering a value of E into our service code, and we get a red thingy. And that's because it's not going to let us do that because this is an unsigned small integer. So what we need to know is, what is a hex code of E? And the easiest way to figure that out is with the calculator in Windows. So just go to your start menu and start typing calculator. And by default, yours is going to look like this, and this is where we can do our typical map. But a lot of people don't even notice these dashed lines here. If you hit the drop down on that, we can switch to a programmer calculator, and that allows us to easily change what type of number we're entering in. So I'm going to select a hex number, and I'm going to put a value of E in, and that tells me that's a decimal value of 14. So instead of putting that E here, I'm going to put a value of 14. Now going back to our chart, the next dilemma we had was we had these to the left and the right. Well, now we know we can't enter hex numbers. So we need to enter the decimal number. So notice it almost doesn't matter. It depends on the value of it. Mainly though, that instance is the one that's going to matter. So we're going to have a class of 4, an instance of 100, and an attribute of 3. 100. Whoops, 100, not 400, and 3. And then, yeah, my member account is going to stay blank. And do not hit the OK button. But just so we see this time, you feel a little awkward hitting the cancel, like what you did just isn't going to happen. I'm going to hit the cancel button, though. And now we'll double-click right back into it and hit our arrow. And we see our values are there. So really, this OK button is saying, put this into this cell. All right, next we have our target config. And then if we open it up, it has a config path, and it's a string. Now, this one can be a little tricky. In fact, let me see if I can easily find this. I'm going to highlight this instruction and click F1 for help. And that is going to bring up our generic module. And then we're going to go into our target config. And yeah, see how it just says port here? And it just assumes that you're going to know it. Let me do a Control F really fast and see if I see port. There's our serial ports. We want, whoops, there's proportional. Yeah, and I really wish this was slightly easier to figure out. But this, if we dig into our help really hard, port number 4 is our Ethernet port. And we do want to send this message out our Ethernet port. And then we're going to go into this IP address right here, which I have configured for 192.168.20.211. So our path on that is going to be 4 to tell it go out of the Ethernet port, comma, 192.168.20.211. And then the rest of these we can leave right at their defaults. Oh, and I did it again. I hit the OK button. I'm just going to hit the undo. And here's a good example. Even though I hit the undo button to get that path back out, I open it up and my data is still in there. All right, now this is the part that gets confusing, is the REQ data and the RES data, because you got to know which one you're actually working with. So I'm going to go back to the help, and our REQ data, that is the SIP message request data. The RES data, that is the response data. So in this case, we are going to be doing a read message, which means we need the response data. All right, now we need to know what size that we want here, because notice it defaulted to an unsigned integer with a 1 ... 1. That means an array size of 1. And if we go to our Guardmaster manual, it says a size in bytes of 28. We'll need to remember that in just a second, but we also want to know a little bit about how that data is coming in, because it's going to save us a little bit of headaches. And if we go down, then we're going to see Appendix E on 175 describes the individual data that's returned. And so here's our input assembly instance data. And this is going to be our golden map here in a little bit to know exactly what's going on. But notice natively in Connected Components Workbench, when it creates an array here, it starts with element 1. And so since we need 28 values, arguably we can go right here, double click on our RES data, and we could change this to 1. .28, and that will get us there. That would get us the size we need. But that's going to give us array elements 1 through 28. Now, if we look at our actual mapping here, we have byte 0 through 27. So to make this tremendously easier for us to follow, what we want to do is we want to make this 0 through 27. That way it's going to line up perfectly with what they have there. Now notice I didn't do anything with the REQ configure oops, and that's actually not REQ config. That should have been REQ data. And that's important enough. I'm going to fix that, because that is a little confusing. That was REQ data. So if we were sending data, that's the one we would be using. But notice I left this at this small array size. Since we're not using it, we can. I really wouldn't even have to put it in. Okay, now we're going to need to do a few other things here, but that gets us close enough to get us going. Now, I had just caught that I'd made a mistake, but it was so last minute that I'm going to go ahead and walk through it, because this is such a common mistake that you reach out to me with. Is we're going to go ahead and download this program. And if you need any help downloading your program or went too fast through creating or anything, look down in the description. We have a course that walks you through all this. And go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We put out at least 2 videos a week. But let's pay attention to these prompts, because I've made the mistake that actually I've made many. I think I've made on a couple of live streams even, is we're going to download with project values. And we see it zooming across there. It's done its download. And normally this prompt is asking us if we want to put it back in run mode. But I told you just to create a new Micro850 program, and I didn't tell you to go set your IP address. So what this is asking is, do we want to change our Ethernet settings? And by default, Connected Components Workbench is going to be on DHCP. So if you get this prompt, you want to click no. Then we're going to get the second prompt to put it back in run mode. And then to fix that, because I'm sure in a second we likely have an error, we're going to double click on our Micro850 in the left pane. And then we're going to select Ethernet, and settings and project controller are different. We're going to click the update from controller, and we're going to see right here, this is going to fill in a second, and then it'll keep us from having that error again. Okay, well, would you look at that? I am slightly surprised. I was feeling confident that we would have a 0 right here and a true right here, because this kind of is deceptive. It says message status and false is good. If we double click on this, it's showing the first element, and the first element is that you have an error. And surprise, surprise, we do not have an error. And this is telling us that it did pull 28 bytes of data, which is what we were hoping for. And that means that in our message data right down here, RES data, we should have our data. So if we open it up, and let's go ahead and make that a little larger, then yes, we do have data in here. So now if we go to our map, we can see that 0.0 and 0.1, which are wired to eStop 1, those should be in byte 10. And so I'm looking at byte 10. I'm going to open it up. So these two should be that eStop. So now I'm going to press the eStop. And there you go. That is those two. Pull it back out. That clears that. And that's going to take you through the SMS data that we talked about in that previous video. And if you didn't catch that or any of those others, then I've created this playlist right here with videos on diagnosing the CR30 and Connected Components Workbench, Studio 5000, now the Micro850, and some really good troubleshooting tips on basic safety relays and safety PLCs. Click here to follow me over there.